United States is we have no idea about food, but there is no evidence to support the transmission of COVID-19 associated with food. So, if you do come back from the supermarket and you're really worried, maybe wash in fresh water. I did read a comment from a food scientist that said soap is for hands, water is for food.
Right.
So rinse if you feel a need to do it.
Very good, thank you. Many coming through here. Another one here, Grant asks, could you ask Alison, given the fact that temperatures over 27 degrees Celsius kills COVID-19, well, that's what Grant says, how critical is it that you wash your hands for 20 seconds if you use hot water over 27 degrees? Are you there, Alison? We will get you back. That's Alison Balance with many of your questions, and they're still rolling through, so we'll just jump back with Alison. But look, just some updates for today. There have been 78 new cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand. New Zealand's total of COVID-19 is now 283. 27 people recovered from COVID-19. 7 are in hospital, all are in a stable condition. 8 arrivals at Auckland Airport were put into quarantine with COVID symptoms, and at Marist College in Mount Albert, Auckland has had more positive cases for COVID-19, and there are now 7 teachers and 4 students. That was just some of the updates this afternoon. And Alison is back. Welcome back, Alison.
Hello.
You might have heard that last one in terms of temperature. I'm not quite sure if you know that or not. 27 degrees Celsius kills COVID-19. How critical is it that you wash your hands for 20 seconds if you use hot water over 27 degrees?
We actually don't know what temperatures kill COVID-19 virus, but
Right.
The critical thing when you're washing your hands is not the temperature of the water, it's the fact that you need to use soap. Soap is the secret ingredient. It's the virus buster. Do it for 20 seconds. Doesn't matter what temperature the water's at.
So, all right, that is very important. Look, just one from me, Alison, before we go. There have been, and we had a few responses. I'm not quite sure if you have you heard about these home testing kits trialled in the UK that may or may not be a bit of an answer to home testing in terms of a prick on your finger. Have you heard about those?
Well, I saw an email come in the other day. I would be very wary of those at the moment. The serious researchers haven't come up with a way of doing home testing as far as I know. So just if you're going to be tested, it has to be done in an authorised laboratory.
Oh, I've got to stick this on as well. I think David Heyman, Professor David Heyman answered this, but we'll do it again. Are cats and dogs a risk for transferring the virus? My elderly neighbour has a very friendly cat that wants to visit me. If I pat the cat, will I put her at risk?
Again, the Centre for Disease Control says there's no evidence that pets transmit COVID-19, so I think you're fine to pat the cat.
All right. Alison Balance, thank you very, very much for your time. And before we go, how are you coping? How are you doing in self-isolation?
I have to say I'm having a thoroughly nice time. It's quite a nice opportunity to spend time in my house and occasionally look at the view.
Oh, good on you. Well, we love your program, so keep the good work. Alison, thank you very much for joining us on the panel.
Okay, take care.
I'm Wallace Chapman. Thank you so much for all your responses this afternoon. Thank you to Melita and Mary for putting the show together. I'm back tomorrow with more of your queries, more of the experts. Until Friday, see you later.
Mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, day 1 of the nationwide lockdown, and the Mosque gunman pleads guilty to 51 charges of murder, 40 of attempted murder and 1 terrorism-related charge. His sentencing will be put off until families can be there. One of the victims says he has nothing but love for the terrorist. New Zealand has joined a third of the world's population in some form of lockdown. We have 78 new confirmed or probable cases of COVID-19, bringing the total to 283. 27 people have recovered. Several infection clusters are being investigated, including a wedding in Wellington, a group trip to New York, and cases related to the cruise ship, the Ruby Princess. And how will hospitals decide who gets priority if they're overwhelmed?
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Prime Minister says she breathed a huge sigh of relief when the man accused of the Christchurch Mosque massacre pleaded guilty to all charges. Brenton Tarrant has admitted to 51 charges of murder, 40 of attempted murder and 1 under the Terrorism Suppression Act. Jacinda Ardern says she knows it will be deeply disappointing for the victims and their families that they cannot gather together right now due to the COVID-19 lockdown.
But I know that there will still be, I'm sure, a certain sense of relief that the whole nation, but particularly our Muslim community, are being spared from a trial that could have otherwise acted as a platform. Nothing will bring their loved ones back, but this is a small reprieve.
Shadia Aman's 68-year-old husband, Ahmed Abdel Ghani, died at the Al Noor Mosque. She says today's development is stunning.
Me, my family, and everyone else from the other victims don't have to live or to relive again all through the courts what happened. We lost our loved ones, but it's just like it's a kind of relief. I don't know. I can't believe it, to be honest with you. Up till now, I don't understand why he did that, but at least it's a big relief for everyone.
Shadia Aman's son Omar narrowly escaped the shootings because he was late to prayers. So far, the government has paid out $1.5 billion to more than 240,000 workers through its wage subsidy scheme. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says 73,000 applications have been paid out and more than 111,000 approved. 47,000 applications are yet to be processed. Mr Robertson says the scheme is designed for employers to make their best endeavours to pay staff 80% of their income.
Let me be very clear. We would rather that people stayed employed than not. We are continuing to work on updated guidance on the scheme, and we urge businesses to take the time to talk to employees, to their banks, and to make a plan.
Grant Robertson says he's heard 1 or 2 cases of the wage subsidy not being passed on, and this is being followed up. The police say people who persistently breach the lockdown could face up to 6 months in prison. The Police Commissioner Mike Bush says that 360 new arrivals were processed at Auckland Airport after midnight. Of those, 8 had symptoms of the virus and were immediately quarantined, and 160 had no plans for isolation and were taken to hotels.
We did have people overnight who claimed they knew nothing about this, knew nothing about the requirement to stay home. So very much in education. If people breach the requirements, they will be warned, and we'll keep a record of those people.
Mike Bush says police are using an educational approach in their first instance, but those who do not comply will be detained and may be prosecuted. 14 dementia residents at a Hawke's Bay rest home have been placed in isolation after a probable case of COVID-19. The residents and some staff at Gladys Mary Rest Home in Napier are waiting for test results tomorrow to see if they've been infected. The probable case was in contact with a person who visited the rest home on 4 consecutive days between March 17th and 20th. That person had a connection to the cruise ship Ruby Princess, which docked in Napier on March 15th. 78 new cases of the virus were confirmed around the country today, bringing the total to 283. New Zealanders around the world are stuck in travel limbo as they rush to get home amid tight restrictions on movement. The government has said there may be no way home for some of these people, although it hasn't ruled out Mercy flights. Katie Gumbrill lives in the south of England and has had 2 sets of flights from London to Auckland cancelled over the past 2 days. She says it's been a lot of work for no return.
It's not worth it, I think, and to go through all that again, I don't know. I just think it's wiser just to stay put at this stage until flights are up and running again. Kind of like lost hope.
Katie Gumbrill says the only flights on offer now are business class, costing more than $4,000. The local share market has had its 4th positive day in a row. The benchmark top 50 index rose more than 2% in early trading following solid gains on European and US markets overnight. It ended up 4% with strong gains in most of the biggest companies as well as tourism-related stocks. Moves by governments and central banks to pump money into their economies seem to have calmed the worst market jitters. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 5. Reports out of Australia say National Rugby League players will be asked to take an 87% pay cut to ensure the survival of the sport if the 2020 season is cancelled as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. League officials and the Players' Union are expected to finalise negotiations on pay cuts on Friday. That will affect every club, including the New Zealand Warriors' top 30 players. The NRL season was postponed on Monday for the foreseeable future. Wellington Phoenix player Tim Payne has issued a tearful apology for a joyriding incident during the team's A-League quarantine period in Sydney, which has resulted in a drink driving charge. Payne drove a golf buggy beyond the team's remote Sydney facility, where they were undergoing 14 days of self-isolation. He and his teammate and passenger Oliver Sale could be fined or suspended. That's the news.
The country goes into lockdown.
Anyone that's been to the Auckland CBD before, you couldn't picture anything more different.
I just got off on the platform from the strangest train ride of my life. It's really eerily quiet, and it sort of reminds me of a Christmas day or a Good Friday early morning.
One person in pyjamas, which I found quite amusing. The street is really empty. It just feels really weird.
With you during the isolation, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 a.m, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Fine spells and isolated showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay mainly fine. Scattered rain tomorrow afternoon. Waitomo to Wellington and Wairarapa, including Taihape and the remainder of Hawke's Bay. Areas of cloud and isolated showers today. Showers becoming widespread tomorrow. Some heavy with hail from tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough, except the Kaikoura Coast, Nelson and Bulla. A period of rain tonight, then scattered showers, clearing tomorrow evening. Kaikoura Coast, Canterbury and Otago, rain spreading north today, gradually clearing from the south tomorrow. However, some heavy falls north of Christchurch until tomorrow evening. Westland and Fiordland rain today, possibly heavy, becoming fine tomorrow. Southland rain easing to isolated showers tonight. Chatham Islands mainly fine, a few showers later tomorrow. RNZ National, it's coming up to 7.5 minutes past 5.
Peace at last. That's the reaction of Farid Ahmed to today's guilty pleas from the man responsible for causing so much hurt on March 15 last year. Mr Ahmed's wife, Husna, was amongst the 51 worshippers killed at the Linwood and Al Noor mosques. News he would not have to endure a trial came through this morning after Brenton Tarrant, in a surprise move, pleaded guilty at the High Court in Christchurch to 51 murder charges, 40 of attempted murder and 1 of engaging in a terrorist act. Conan Young was in court.
Brenton Harrison Tarrant, you are separately in charges of 1 to 15 of the Crown charge list, charged that on the 15th day of March 2019 at Christchurch, you did murder Khalid Al-Haj Mustafa, Musa Nur Awale, Hamza Khalid Al-Haj Mustafa, Ashraf El-Murzi Raghib.
It took the court registrar 2 minutes and 32 seconds to read all of the names of those murdered at the two mosques on March 15. When she had finished, the man responsible for their deaths, who appeared via a video link from his Auckland prison, was asked to enter his plea.
Yes, guilty.
It took the registrar almost as long to read the names of each of the 40 worshippers. The 29-year-old was accused of attempting to murder, many of whom continue to suffer long-term injuries.
To each of these charges, charge 52 to 91. How do you plead? Guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Only the imams of the Al Noor and Linwood mosques, Gamal Foda and Abdul Alabi Latif, were in the public gallery to hear the shooter take accountability for his crimes, including engaging in a terrorist act. Restrictions on gatherings due to COVID-19 meant victims and their families were not even told the hearing was taking place. However, Justice Cameron Mander is determined they will be at court for sentencing, something he says will not happen until the COVID-19 restrictions are lifted.
It is regrettable that the COVID-19 restrictions that presently apply do not permit victims and their families to travel to be present in the courtroom when the defendant entered his pleas of guilty. In an effort in some small way to mitigate the unfortunate circumstances that leaves victims and their families excluded from the courtroom, arrangements were made to bring Messrs Albi and Fudar to the court to bear witness on behalf of the worshippers of their respective mosques.
Gamal Foda, who survived the shootings, turned away from the screen on which Tarrant appeared and was visibly upset as the long list of those killed and wounded was read out. He and Imam Abdul Alabi Latif both declined to comment after today's hearing. But Fareed Ahmed, who famously forgave the shooter, says the guilty pleas will give his community peace at last.
I'm very happy to hear that he has accepted his guilt. This is a step towards the right direction. I still pray that he will be a loving person and he will not practice any hate.
Sheikh Hassan Rubel was shot 3 times inside the El Noor Mosque. He says not having a trial will ease the pressure for victims' families.
I feel that all the memories are coming back, and inside, most of us, the victim families, we are feeling really shaky and emotional. So I think this decision will relieve us from lots of mental pressures.
John Milne, the father of 14-year-old Saeed, who died at El Noor, says he and his family are celebrating.
My daughter said it all. Yahoo! I was happy anyway, but now I'm happier. I've forgiven him. My wife won't have to go through all the drama that she was trying to get prepared for. She was determined not to cry, just to show him that what he'd done didn't really affect her. But I don't think she would have been that strong.
The Police Commissioner, Mike Bush, paid tribute to the victims and their families, saying they had inspired all of us to be kind and more tolerant.
I want to acknowledge the courage, but also the grief of the victims. And I have no doubt this plea will have an impact on all of you. And it will ensure that you don't have to relive this through a court trial.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says when she heard about the guilty pleas, she breathed a sigh of relief.
I know that there will still be, I'm sure, a certain sense of relief that the whole nation, but particularly our Muslim community, are being spared from a trial that could have otherwise acted as a platform. Nothing will bring their loved ones back, but this is a small reprieve.
The ongoing disruptions caused by the nationwide COVID-19 lockdown means a sentencing date may not be finalised for some months. Tarrant has been remanded in custody and will next appear on May 1st for a call-over. Kei o tō tahi ahau mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Kaninyang tēnei.
Day 1 of the nationwide lockdown is drawing to an end, and the Prime Minister has thanked New Zealanders for doing their bit to contain COVID-19. There are 78 new cases with 7 people in hospital. All of them are in a stable condition. While the lockdown had completely escaped the attention of some people approached on the streets by police last night, Jacinda Ardern has since clarified that a number of them were homeless. To support them and others, the government today announced a $27 million package to ensure people have access to food, a place to live and somewhere safe to go, such as women's refuge, if needed. Here's political reporter Joe Moyer.
Jacinda Ardern says supermarkets have been generally orderly in the last 24 hours and panic buying for the most part is calming down. She says she can't even imagine what some of the staff at those essential services are dealing with.
I was once a checkout operator. I can tell you that it is a thankless job at the best of times. I cannot imagine what some of those individuals will have experienced in the last few weeks. But on behalf of all New Zealand, I say thank you to them.
The Police Commissioner says overall, New Zealanders have been very responsive to the call to stay home. And as far as he's aware, there were no major problems or arrests after the midnight deadline. But he says not everyone has got the message.
We did have people overnight who claimed they knew nothing about this, knew nothing about the requirement to stay home. So very much in education. If people breach the requirements, they will be warned, and we'll keep a record of those people. If people do not comply, the very next step is, if there's no other way of doing this, because we do want to take a very caring and compassionate approach to this, but if people won't comply, we do have the authority to then detain them, take them to our place.
Jacinda Ardern was perplexed as to how people couldn't know what was going on.
I certainly can't see that being the case for long. People will be stepping out of their homes, and if they haven't heard about what's happening, they'll be at least thinking there's some kind of apocalypse right now. I mean, I can't imagine how you could not know that New Zealand is locking down and why. But I think what the police are doing is at least giving people the chance to have that information shared with them, using warnings, not escalating until they need to.
There will be a visible police presence on the streets during the lockdown, and people will be checked to make sure they're either carrying out an essential service or going to get essential goods like food or medicine. Commissioner Bush says the first approach by police will be to educate people and tell them what they're supposed to be doing, but detainment and prosecution are all possible for serious breaches or for people regularly flouting the rules.
We often take people into custody for offences once they've contemplated life and the impact of their decision. We often let them go without charge.
Moving around outside your home unnecessarily is actively discouraged, but he says people can get around locally if they have a good reason. Driving to a local park is one example.
You've heard the Prime Minister say keep it local. Absolutely. Don't be driving willy-nilly all over town. For me, it's about if it's nearby, if it's for exercise, that's okay.
To the nearest park,
nearby,
to the nearest
very local,
or whatever, local and limited.
But for the right reason. But let's not forget, this is about staying home so you stay alive.
The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says several possible new clusters of community outbreak are being investigated, including a rest home in Hamilton.
There is also a number of people who were at a wedding in Wellington recently, a group of people who were part of a trip to the United States. There is also a group that appear to be associated with contact from someone who was on the Ruby Princess and that cruise ship, and that group is in Hawke's Bay, and there will be messaging out from the District Health Board around that.
He also announced changes by Pharmac, the country's drug buying agency, that will kick in at midnight tonight.
Pharmacists will be required to limit dispensing of all funded pharmaceuticals to 1 month's supply or 3 months' supply for oral contraceptives.
He says it's not a case of there being a shortage of medicines, but because people have been stockpiling, these measures are needed to protect availability. A large number of New Zealanders are still returning home from overseas, and all of them are now being screened. This morning, 360 arrived, 8 with COVID-19 symptoms, and another 160 with no secure isolation plans were quarantined. Dr Bloomfield says not everyone has been tested at the airport and explained the reason.
It could use up all our testing capacity on any one day and stop us identifying quickly other high-risk and positive cases in the community. And secondly, a negative test doesn't rule out that someone might have the infection but be harbouring it. So it doesn't change what we do with people.
The Finance Minister Grant Robertson has also given an update on the wage subsidy scheme. $1.5 billion has been paid out so far, covering about 244,000 workers. Mr Robertson says there are clear expectations and legal obligations on employers taking money for wage subsidies and to cover people taking sick leave or having to quarantine to act in good faith. He warns if that is not happening, employers can expect further action from government agencies. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
It is 5:19 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. How did your first day go in lockdown? What did you do to amuse yourselves and what observations have you got? We would love to hear from you. Modelling by New Zealand researchers shows how the country is buying time in the fight against COVID-19. But there's no certainty that the 4-week lockdown will be enough. Researchers say that left unchecked, the virus would infect 89% of the population and up to 80,000 people would die. The good news is, with the current strict measures, fatalities would drop considerably. But that scenario requires the restrictions to be in place for some time. University of Auckland's Professor Sean Hendy is one of the modellers and he joins me now. Good evening. Those are pretty grim figures, so tell us what difference the current measures make to that modelling.
Yeah, well, I mean, the important thing about that modelling is we did a lot of that work before New Zealand took these very strict measures. So we were looking at really what would happen if we didn't. And as you said, those figures are pretty grim if we didn't take any action. But we have taken some very strong controls, and we actually think that gives us a pretty good chance of getting on top of things. One thing that's not in our modelling is, and this is something we'll be working on in the next couple of weeks, is the effect of things like contact tracing and testing. We've yet to model that, and that actually gives us a pretty good chance of reducing the length of time we'll have to be in that lockdown. But we're going to have to watch those case numbers. So really our argument is that provided we're very clearly getting on top of the number of case numbers, but especially the community transmission, that'll be a signal as to whether we can relax the current alert level 4.
Okay, a number of things in there. So, doing what we're doing now, what are you modelling for fatality rates?
Yeah, so actually it would be very low. Like if we kept this up, we could keep in our model we'd keep the fatality rate to very small numbers.
Like what, less than 100?
But absolutely, yeah. But and the big but is we'd have to keep that going for a long time, essentially until we've got a vaccine. But as I said, because we've also got the contact tracing taking place and the testing taking place, and the fact that we can quarantine people who have COVID-19, that actually means that this regime should be more effective than what we've modelled.
Okay, so just so that I'm clear here, when you say that we would need to extend the time we're in a lockdown basically to continue the benefits of lowering the infection rate and lowering the death rate, are you talking about indefinitely, i.e. until we get a vaccine?
Yeah, I mean, so just to be clear, basically what our modelling has said is what we're doing now is the right thing, right? That if we kept this up indefinitely, we would actually keep the disease out. But the fact that we've got the contact tracing going at the same time actually gives us a chance of stamping it out and being able to relax the measures that we've got on now. But if needs be, the type of strategy that we're embracing now, we can use it into the future to keep deaths low.
So if we are able to trace 100% of contacts, then we can, take our foot off the accelerator in terms of the lockdown. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, no, that's basically it. And it's not, we don't necessarily have to get 100%, but we have to get enough to slow the spread down sufficiently. And, we're working on exactly how efficient we have to be at that at the moment, but it doesn't have to be at 100%. We just have to stop enough people passing it on, and eventually the disease will die out. But yeah, that's basically it. The better we get at contact tracing, the better we get at testing, the shorter the lockdowns are going to have to be.
So what about...
The other thing to remember is if we did take the brakes off and we did have another flare-up, then we could always go back to these lockdowns. And then the other thing is potentially we could relax them regionally. So we're also looking at regional models. What would be the effect of doing that? For example, keeping the alert level high in Auckland and maybe restricting travel between Auckland and other parts of the country.
What about another scenario? What about if we closed our borders internationally? Would that allow us to relax movement within the country? So stop people coming in altogether?
That will help. But, by and large, we think that... But at the moment, that's less risky than the community transmission. We're really concerned about the transmission that might be taking place in parts of the country, that we're unaware, because that's where there's the potential for the exponential growth that we're seeing in Italy and the United States at the moment. So, yes, we need to keep these tight restrictions on at the border. That helps us, reduces the number of cases we have to deal with, reduces the number of people that are potentially passing it on to other people in the community. So those will probably need to stay in place for quite some time. But it's really it's the contact tracing and eliminating the community transmission that's really important.
Before you go, because some of these numbers are really confronting, should we be heartened by this modelling or should we be really worried about it?
Oh, look, I think we should be heartened, and I think I'm really pleased that that the government is using good modelling and good data. We're one of the groups that's feeding in modelling to the government, and we're definitely being listened to, and it's played a role in the decision making. I think we should be heartened by it. It shows us that we've got a viable strategy, and perhaps shows the counterfactual, what would happen if we did nothing. And I think that's always good to know, because if we succeed, we're always going to be wondering, did we really have to do that? And I think the modelling shows that, well, yes, we did.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That is Professor Sean Hendy, and he is one of the modellers who worked on the research that tells us what would happen if New Zealand did not bring in these strict measures. The Auckland Girls' School, Marist College, is one of the clusters of infection being tracked by health authorities. 11 people connected with the school are now confirmed to have COVID-19. The first case was a teacher, and that was confirmed on Sunday. By yesterday, there were a total of 5 cases within the school community. Today, it's 11. Marist College Board Chair Stephen Dallow joins us now. Good evening, Stephen. What have you been told to expect in terms of more cases?
Oh, kia ora, Lisa. Look, it is expected to grow, a bit like what our Prime Minister is saying. It's going to get worse before it calms. At the moment, we have had new numbers in the last little while that we're now hitting 13, which is 9 staff and 4 students, all in our senior years of the college.
So are those confirmed or probable cases? What can you tell us?
Yes, they are confirmed cases from parents that have been notified in the last few hours.
So what is the school community saying to you about the situation, and have you named these people to students and parents and teachers within that community?
We haven't named them. We've worked really closely with the Ministry of Health on this, who take our contact lists and are making contact directly with any students or staff that would have come in close contact with any confirmed case. We want to respect our students' privacy through this process. Our community is scared. Some of them are worried and nervous. Others are 100% supportive of what we are doing. The key thing is working closely with the Ministry of Health to make sure that we are getting the information out to our community as quickly as possible.
In some ways, does not naming these people to your school community create more fear, because everyone's looking over their shoulder wondering?
Probably does, but today we did let our community know that the students are just in year 12 and 13 at this stage, and I myself have had a phone call from the Ministry of Health, so I know that they are quickly responding to anybody that has come in close contact. And I guess, it's a case of trusting the process. We want to make sure our students' well-being is looked after in their mental health, and I'm concerned if we started naming students or teachers, that wouldn't be fair.
Stephen, what do you know about how these people are doing, the 13 people, what kind of symptoms they had, and how, intense the cases are?
From the ones that I've spoken personally with, a lot of it was mild to medium symptoms, very much sort of the cold and flu type symptoms, coughing and the fever. Some of the ones that we've got test results back, because they were tested nearly 4 or 5 days ago now, are actually already feeling much better, if not back to full health. However, we're aware some are still feeling the full brunt of flu-like symptoms. I'm conscious of a couple of teachers that, have got it pretty tough, but to my knowledge, none of our team are in hospital.
So what can you tell us about the circumstances of the first case?
Well, we don't really know where the first case came from. I'm guessing we may never know.
You mean you don't know where that person contracted it from?
No, they didn't meet anybody from overseas or have any direct overseas links. There was, rumours out there about where family and things had worked, but Ministry of Health have come back going, no, that's not the case. We've also got students that may have contracted it in their part-time jobs or workplaces, not necessarily through school either. It is unknown, and I'd hate to speculate.
Thank you for joining us tonight. That is Marist College Board Chair Stephen Dallow. on Checkpoint on RNZ National. Rough sleepers find themselves with nowhere to go during the 4-week lockdown. Which patients are prioritised if intensive care units are swamped with COVID-19 cases? And why thousands of Aucklanders received surprise bouquets of fresh flowers before the country went into lockdown. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. First, here's Susanna Leotawa with the headlines.
The Prime Minister says she breathed a huge sigh of relief when the Christchurch Mosque shooter pleaded guilty to all charges. Brenton Tarrant this morning admitted to 51 charges of murder, 40 of attempted murder and 1 under the Terrorism Suppression Act. Jacinda Ardern says she knows the victims and their families will be deeply disappointed at not being able to gather together right now due to the lockdown. Shadia Amin, whose husband was killed at Al Noor Mosque, says the guilty pleas are a big relief. The government has paid out $1.5 billion to more than 240,000 workers through wage subsidies aimed at employers, paying staff 80% of their usual income during the lockdown. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says 73,000 applications have been paid out, more than 111,000 approved, and another 47,000 yet to be processed. The Police Commissioner Mike Bush says 8 of the 360 people processed at Auckland Airport last night had symptoms of the virus and were quarantined, while 160 had no isolation plans and were taken to hotels. Mike Bush says police are educating people about the lockdown rules at first, but those who do not comply will be detained and may face up to 6 months in jail. Residents and some staff at Gladys Mary Rest Home in Napier will find out tomorrow if they've been infected after a probable case of COVID-19. The case was in contact with a person who visited the rest home on 4 consecutive days between March 17th and 20th. That person had a connection to the cruise ship Ruby Princess, which docked in Napier on March 15th. New Zealanders worldwide are stuck in travel limbo as they scramble to get home amid tight restrictions on movement. The government says some may not be able to get home, although it hasn't ruled out Mercy flights. The benchmark Top 50 index rose more than 2% in early trading after solid gains on European and US markets overnight. It ended up 4% with strong gains in most of the biggest companies, as well as tourism related. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
And thanks for joining us. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time now for Business News with Nona Peltier. Nona, what's been going on the markets?
Quite a lot of information today from some of our bigger companies. Auckland Airport's come back and given us a bit of a taste of where things are heading with them. They're going to make further cuts. They've announced a number of measures. They're going to cut back on some of their planned expenditure because, of course, income will be down for a while and it's unknown how long that's going to be. They're, for example, getting rid of their plans to build that second runway for the moment. Fletcher Building, we spoke with them. What are they doing? They're still paying their staff because they have a lot of business units to shut down, which can't go down quickly. For example, Golden Cement Company is just as simply as just flicking a switch. They're paying their staff with a special payment until the end of next week, and then they're going to come back and tell us a little bit more about what they're doing. The other companies that we heard from today, just late this afternoon, was Port of Tauranga. They are holding back on their guidance. However, they say that things are going pretty good. They're an essential service. However, a number of their clients are not. So they expect that's going to hold up some freight. Overall, the market definitely had a stronger tone today. We were 4th day in a row where we've seen a rise, quite a strong one today, 4%. And that means that there is some signs that perhaps the market has found a floor. On the other hand, Asia opened a little bit concerned. So while we were up 4%, the Nikkei was down 4%. And the futures market's looking a little bit shaky. So we may not be out of the woods yet. Now, so where else am I at? Okay, so
just quickly, maybe the dollar before we go.
Yeah, we were trading up 58.3 US cents, 98.6 Australian, and 49.2 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with our business news. What happens if the country's intensive care units are swamped with COVID-19 cases? Who or what will decide which patients get priority? Well, that is exactly what a group of doctors and ethics specialists and lay representatives are drawing up right now, those guidelines. A Health Ministry audit shows there are currently 153 intensive care beds in public hospitals, and that could be expanded to just over 560 by co-opting space from other units. The DHBs have access to about 520 ventilators. Dr. Andrew Stapleton is the spokesperson for the Australia-New Zealand Intensive Care Society COVID-19 group. I asked him if that's enough.
What we have to bear in mind is these beds aren't empty and waiting for patients to get COVID. They are 80 to 90% full at all times. So in truth, the amount of spare available beds is low. If people don't follow the rules, if the disease does spread and we get a cohort or a group of patients all coming through at once, we will very quickly exhaust that ICU capacity.
Do those beds, are there specialist staff? I know they're talking about expanding the number of ICU beds, but do those beds get tended to by specific specialised staff, and do we have those staff?
So we've got enough beds. So we've got enough staff for all the beds that we've got. Once we start expanding beyond our normal numbers, we have to change the way we provide care. Fortunately, if you can call it that, when we stop, or now we've stopped doing most elective surgery, we've freed up a whole load of staff who are used to dealing with unconscious patients in the operating theatre or perhaps in the recovery room. They're not ICU nurses, but they can look after patients safely who are asleep, as ICU patients often are, and they can do that under the direct supervision of an ICU nurse, and I believe that is safe, yes.
What do we know about the demand seen in other countries for ICU beds, and where might we sit?
We have a great advantage in New Zealand because other people have had it so hard. Countries who didn't know this was coming, or countries who have taken a different approach to us, have been overwhelmed very quickly in the ICU, and we are doing everything we can, or the Prime Minister is helping us to do everything we can to avoid that scenario, because it's very unpleasant indeed.
You would, I am assuming, have seen the study that came out of London that was saying about 4.5% of those infected with COVID-19 would need hospital care, and they were estimating 30% of those people may need or would need ICU care involving some kind of assistance breathing. Could we cope with that level?
There's lots of the statistics from different countries are quite different, but even if you take a best case scenario, which is probably from the Chinese data, the answer is that if we get more than 3,000 or 4,000 patients in New Zealand at the same time, or within the same 2 to 3 week period, that is going to overwhelm our current ICU capacity.
And what does overwhelmed look like? What do you do then?
Well, we make beds throughout the hospital. We change our staffing. We use staff who are not used to looking after ICU patients, and we have to begin to triage patients as they come through the doors, which no one wants to do.
So the other thing this audit shows us is the availability of ventilators. It says potentially they could gather around 520. How does that compare to other countries that would be like us in terms of health systems?
Well, the 520 includes repurposing anaesthetic machines, which have ventilators built into them, which are perfectly appropriate, and then we can match the number of beds we have to the number of ventilators we have. It's true that overall we have towards the lower end in the OECD of ventilators per 100,000 of population, which doesn't help in this situation, but which is appropriate for the way we use ICU on a day-to-day basis.
If you repurpose anaesthetic ventilators, that means no operations then, though, doesn't it?
We wouldn't repurpose them all. We always have to be able to do emergency surgeries. Those things don't go away. We would just have to decide where that balance lay.
And when resources do get tight, who decides who should get access to what we have? And what will the criteria be?
So there will be criteria. Well, the criteria are complicated. They're worked out. They're being worked out, in fact, by a committee of ethicists and intensive care specialists and infectious disease specialists, as well as a lay person representative and Maori representative, a gender-balanced group. And we're working on a triage tool which will assist physicians at every hospital make a decision. And for the hard decisions, it won't just be one doctor making the decision. It'll be a group of 2 or 3 using all the information and their expertise at their fingertips.
So this committee is currently working through the guidelines?
Yes, that's correct.
And how far through are you?
Very nearly complete. Ideally, we'd like to have the triage tool and these guidelines ready by the end of this week.
What can you tell us about what the guidelines or recommendations are?
I'm not really prepared to do that before they're socialised amongst the medical community, and the Ministry of Health also needs to see them, and they are involved, but they need to sign off on them, I suppose.
Understand you don't want to give us the detail, but can you give us a broad spectrum? So will you be considering the age of the patient and existing medical conditions when deciding who should get access?
It's a lot wider than that. In fact, we'll be considering the ethical considerations, equity. We'll be considering things that we know lead to poorer outcome. We'll be considering how difficult and resource-intensive it is to look after a particular patient. Most importantly, which I should have said first, we'll be considering the patient's wishes and those of their family.
But in essence, what you are putting together is a list that will prioritise patients if we get to the point where there is not enough resource for everyone.
Yes, I think you would agree. It would be remiss of us not to do so.
So who will that go to be signed off finally?
So it's a shared responsibility between the mainly ANZICS, that's the Australian New Zealand Intensive Care Society group, and the Ministry of Health. And the tool itself is only a tool. It just produces a ranking. It's not deciding, a machine is not deciding, or a tool is not deciding who lives and who dies. That decision will always be made by a doctor or 3 at the site where the patients are.
So ultimately the buck will stop with the physicians who are on site, but this is what, a tool to begin the process for them in making that decision?
Yep, that's exactly right.
That is a lot of responsibility, isn't it?
Yes, and that is why we hope we never get to that position, and why we continue to reinforce the message to those New Zealanders who may think that this is overblown or exaggerated. It really isn't. Please follow the guidelines that have been set out by the Prime Minister.
So to those people who are wandering around today with no purpose, are not essential services and shouldn't be outside, talk to them directly now.
Well, what infuriates me about that behaviour is that it's not them that they're putting at risk, because they're probably young and well, and when they spread the virus, it won't be them that are most affected by it. But it might be their parents or their grandparents, so they should really think twice.
That's Dr. Andrew Stapleton. Auckland Airport has mothballed big projects and laid off 90 contractors as it tackles the impact of COVID-19. It is one of a number of multi-billion-dollar businesses taking extraordinary measures to stay afloat. Sharon Brett-Kelly reports.
Auckland Airport told 90 contract workers this morning their jobs were finished after it suspended $2 billion of new projects. They include a second runway, hotel, the domestic jet hub and a multi-storey car park. CEO Adrian Littlewood says it cannot keep costly projects open.
The holding cost of just holding those projects open while we try to determine that future is incredibly expensive just to hold on. So we think it's best that we suspend those projects, recalibrate and work out what our timing looks like.
He says the company is reviewing the situation hour by hour. The airport is also talking to many of its 600 remaining employees about cutting their hours and salaries by 20%. Most listed companies have taken steps to conserve cash and cut costs.
Costs just keep burning, and it becomes very, very important to start minimising those.
That's Fletcher Building's CEO, Ross Taylor.
Cash is king. Just to be prudent. We cancelled the dividend we were going to pay, as well as we've stopped the buyback, just to make sure we're not moving cash out of the business unnecessarily at this stage while we're in such an uncertain period of time.
Many firms are making similar moves, cutting dividend payments, executive pay and non-essential spending. Property companies Argosy and Property for Industry have each secured an extra $50 million in new credit lines, and the Marsden Point oil refinery operator Refining New Zealand has rejigged its credit, as well as cost-cutting and halving production. Paul Zealand is Managing Director.
We've gone and talked with our banks, and they've done an incredible job of turning around some difficult things quickly. And what we've agreed with the banks is they will extend some of our lines of credit. We don't expect to need them, but as we look forward through this 2020 and into 2021, it just gives us that extra measure of financial robustness.
Most companies, including the warehouse, have also withdrawn any earnings forecast for the rest of the year. And the Red Shed says it is working on ways to support its 12,000 employees at home. Mō te hotaka o te ahi ko Sharon Brett Kelly, aho.
It is 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. First day of lockdown today. Let me know how your employer is handling this. Are you being paid? Is it holiday pay? Have you been asked to take leave? What's going on out there? You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email. checkpoint@rnz.co.nz is our address. Agencies have kicked into high gear to get rough sleepers into accommodation during the lockdown, but some people still have nowhere to go. Groups working with rough sleepers had to turn people away last night as the first day of lockdown began. Housing reporter Eva Corlett filed this story.
There are groups of people sleeping in cars in Northland, someone living in a tent in Napier, and people parking up in Auckland neighbourhoods. As those who are lucky to have a home are bunkering down for a month-long lockdown, others are feeling scared about where they will go. About 26 people turned up to Lifewise on Auckland's Karangahape Road today to seek emergency accommodation. Since yesterday, they've housed 33 people, but today they had to turn 8 away. Its spokesperson, Zoe Trull, says as soon as a room appears online, they contact the motel.
Our messaging yesterday was that we were only housing people who were unwell or were in the high-risk vulnerability category. Today we're changing that. We're housing whoever we can, which is great. We turned away about 15 yesterday, and I think they just went back to sleep on the street.
Ms Trull says the government is now really stepping up.
Things have really radically changed in the last couple of days. People on the street are getting pretty worried with the lockdown. They're feeling scared, isolated, and really wanting to get into housing. And the government's really starting to shift into high gear to help us make that happen, which is excellent.
Ms Trull hopes there is a silver lining to the crisis and more people will be permanently housed.
We spoke to someone this week who's been 30 years on the street and really wanting to get inside. And so there's a change on both sides, the government's will to make this happen and people who are on the street, their desire to have this happen.
Wellington faith-based community organisation DCM is also working with government to hand out phones and SIM cards to people in precarious living situations so they can be contacted. DCM's Stephanie McIntyre says dozens have been handed out so far, and she predicts that number could rise to about 100. Yesterday, up to 20 people turned up to their Wellington site seeking help, but she says it's urgent that agencies like theirs come up with ways to support people at a distance.
They weren't maintaining physical distance, they were sharing cigarettes, they were sharing food, and so some alarming things that help us understand why it's really important that relatively quickly agencies like ours, we need to stop drawing people to our physical site.
Ms McIntyre estimates about 20 people are still on the streets or living in the bush in Wellington, and their street outreach teams are trying to find them. The chair of the Wellington Homeless Women's Trust, Kirsten Patterson, says women experiencing invisible homelessness, sleeping in garages, cars and on couches, could put themselves at risk risk to have a roof over their head.
We're going to have women staying in unsafe places, and we are really worried about the services that can't be provided during this time and what impact that's going to have on social distancing and our ability to get on top of this. Because if we have a homeless community who are not able to have somewhere safe to isolate, then we are going to have movement around the community.
Kirsten Patterson is urging people to keep an eye on their neighbours during the lockdown. The Ministry for Housing and Urban Development says it's secured 400 extra places for emergency accommodation since the alert level system was announced. Most of those are in motels and for people sleeping rough or in night shelters. Figures on just how many people it's housed are not yet available. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Eva Colette tēnei.
As we adjust to life in lockdown, Kiwis in Australia want similar measures to come into place there, and they want it soon. There have been close to 2,500 cases in Australia so far and 12 deaths. But malls, hairdressers and schools remain open. Lydia Batham caught up with 2 New Zealanders living there to find out what life is like for them.
Across the Tasman, the number of cases of COVID-19 is doubling close to every 3 days. But unlike here, Australia hasn't gone into full lockdown, with life sounding much like it was here a few days ago. Kelly Hill's from Christchurch, but has been living in Perth for nearly 7 years. While currently in self-isolation after her partner Corey returned from a trip to New Zealand, she says a mix of things are still available to those in Western Australia.
Most of the schools in WA and things are still open. Supermarkets. I think the other day they put a thing in place that hairdressers could only be the hairdresser for 30 minutes or something. Yet hairdressers were still able to operate, as opposed to any beauty salons and everything had to close. Gyms are all closed. The swimming pools. Cafes are allowed to do takeaway. Same with restaurants, pubs and all closed, nightclubs closed.
On the other side of the country in Sydney, Ellery Marsh, who's originally from Auckland, is working from home and can also access a fair amount.
We're sort of soft shut down at the moment, so it's we can go to the shops, we can still actually get takeaway, but we can't go to really any gatherings of any kind at all. We can't go to restaurants and that kind of thing, so the schools are sort of slowly shutting down as well, except for the essential service parents.
Ellery says the messaging there seems mixed.
It doesn't feel like there is a clear plan, and I get that it is difficult and we've got an economy to look after, but no, it does feel a little bit haphazard.
While Kelly thinks the Australian government needed to act quicker.
I think that they're just moving too slow. We had cases, before New Zealand did. They've only really started acting upon it now. Only this week did they start closing things. We started closing our borders after New Zealand did. I don't know if there's that issue with the cruise ship that came in and they all got let off. So now that's kind of spreading throughout Australia as well. So it's pretty scary that they didn't act faster.
For both, there's concerns about the lack of access to benefits should they lose their jobs.
I know there's lots of petitions and stuff going around because at the moment, Kiwis living in Australia, we don't get any financial support. So if we are unfortunate to lose our jobs, we don't get any job seeker payments or New Start allowance or anything like that. So it is very hard times over here, just having to watch spending and things.
In the good times, you never even think that you'll ever need, because you just think you are in a stable job. But when things like this happen, it does make a huge difference, and it hasn't affected me yet. I know one other Kiwi that it has affected, him and his family, which is terrible shame.
And that was some Kiwis living in Australia speaking to Lydia Batham. A lot of them want the same kind of measures in Australia as we have here right now in New Zealand. Let's get to some of your feedback now. Lynn has got in touch to say great interview with Andrew Stapleton. He is on this ICU committee who's deciding guidelines for treatment, who gets priority if we are overrun with cases, if. Pity he's not able to influence Australia, says Lynn. Their decision-making appears to be dodgy. Queensland is refusing to triage. triage. And Marshall has got in contact about who's open and who's not. Now, Marshall says it makes sense for butchers and greengrocers to be open on the same one-in, one-out basis as dairies, as they address the same needs and will have planned to stay open with according stock levels. Please take this up with MBIE or government, as MBIE is saying they aren't essential. This will also disadvantage them when the crisis passes and lead to supermarkets monopolising grocery businesses. Let me know what you think of that one, because really those are just more stores that are open. And will that mean more people wobbling around going to more stores when there are already suppliers of those goods? Or do you think it would be good to have them open as well? Text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. If you're just joining us, just to bring you up to date, the figures for today, 78 new or confirmed cases of COVID-19. That brings our total to 283. 7 people are in hospital now. All of them are in stable condition. And once again, nobody has need intensive care. The government has today unveiled a $27 million package. That package is aimed at making sure disadvantaged people have food and a place to live during the lockdown. It's also to support the disabled and those people at risk of family violence. In terms of tests, we've done 12,683 tests to date. Thousands of Aucklanders received surprise bouquets of fresh flowers before the country went into lockdown from a wholesaler who saw a last chance opportunity to bring joy to people before isolation. Fresh cut flower wholesalers' business motto is bringing beauty and happiness to New Zealanders. But as the business prepared to shut down, its owners couldn't bear to see all of its stock go to waste. So in a surprise gesture, it organised flowers to be sent to teachers, nurses and other essential workers, as well as local families and hospices around Auckland. Indira Stewart has more.
When New Zealand moved into Alert Level 3 on Monday afternoon, Jason Kitely, owner of Auckland's Fresh Cut Flowers wholesaler, had to think fast about what to do with their perishable flowers.
We offered them very cheaply to the public, and then we were looking for good places to put the flowers that basically allowed someone to get some happiness from them.
Hundreds of bouquets were sent to Healthline call centre workers who've been working tirelessly over the past few weeks. A staff member sent more bunches to teachers at local schools who were preparing for lockdowns, and frontline workers and patients in hospitals also received surprise bouquets. They were fresh roses, carnations, chrysanthemums, snapdragons, tulips, lilies and more, in a range of colours spread out around Auckland before the city went dark and people closed their doors for lockdown.
It would be thousands of stems, maybe even 10,000 individual flowers. We sort of exist to bring beauty, happiness and comfort to people's lives, and we often do that in an indirect way through our florists, wedding specialists and supermarkets, etc. So it's been far more connected this time. We know one of the recipients had just found out her mum had terminal cancer, and just as she found a bunch of flowers on her doorstep. So it has really provided that happiness and comfort to people, and hopefully lots of people get to enjoy it while they're stuck at home for the next 4 weeks.
Fresh Cut Flowers wholesaler are clients of the IT business next door, Unified Digital. Its owner, Daniel Oliver, says many of his clients have been hit hard over the past few weeks.
It's been quite surreal. The fact that this has escalated so quickly, it's gone from absolutely nothing to, in a matter of weeks, something that everyone's life has to revolve around now. The uncertainty is probably the most difficult thing for New Zealand businesses.
When Daniel found out the couple were trying to give out as many flowers as they could, he called his wife for help.
Well, when Dan gave me the call, we were already really busy trying to organise the kids and everyone to go into lockdown, making sure we had everything we needed. And once he sent me the picture, that just really broke my heart, and there was no way I could let him say no or to just throw the flowers away. And so that's why we picked our cards as many roses as we could to give away.
That's Lysiele Oliver. She and her husband Daniel spent all day Tuesday and Wednesday delivering the flowers around Auckland.
Women were really blown away and just really blessed by the roses that they were given. I know a lot of the women right now are feeling anxious and uneasy about the impact the virus will have on them and their families and their livelihood. And so it It was really received really well. I received a lot of comments back on Facebook and photos from women who said, thank you so much for these flowers. It's really brightened up my day during this time, and so they were really grateful. It was a bittersweet moment because when I saw the flowers, I was heartbroken as I knew that it was a representation of how the virus is impacting businesses in New Zealand.
As for fresh cut flowers, a 25-year-old business now shut down until further notice. Its owners have spent their first day in lockdown reflecting.
I think it is bittersweet. It is very challenging, but I think all New Zealanders need to do their share and their portion. And no matter when you think that things are pretty tough in your own circumstance, it's very easy to look across and find someone in a worse situation. I think the government and many people have sort of been summing it up really. Be kind and patient with each other, and we'll all get through this and look forward to coming out the other side.
For Checkpoint, Indira Stewart.
Well, after 6, we'll have more on the guilty pleas from the Mosque gunman.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with tēnei. The Prime Minister is confident the country has enough personal protective equipment for frontline health workers. The Nurses Organisation is calling for all nurses in hospitals and primary care to be given personal protective equipment, with some nurses saying they don't feel safe at work without it. The Ministry of Health says hospital staff do not routinely need to wear masks, but they're working on a list prioritising who needs protective gear and for what. Jacinda Ardern says there are millions of face masks available in New Zealand.
What I am seeking ongoing assurances from is that distribution chain is working as it should, something I followed up again just this morning, having seen a bit of commentary around this issue.
Jacinda Ardern. The Finance Minister says unemployment due to COVID-19 will be significantly worse than during the global financial crisis in 2008. During that time, unemployment reached 6.7%. Some economists are projecting the economic shock this time could see the jobless rate soar as high as 30%. Grant Robertson says these projections are difficult to assess, but it's clear that unemployment will rise substantially.
We've said from the beginning, we're here to cushion the blow. We cannot save every job and we cannot save every business. And so this is going to have a very, very large effect. We're working as hard as we possibly can to reduce that number to as low as it can possibly be.
Finance Minister Grant Robertson. Projections estimate New Zealand could get thousands of cases of COVID-19 before it reaches a turning point. The Director-General of Health has confirmed 78 new cases of the virus today, bringing the total to 283. Ashley Bloomfield says modelling on predicted case numbers will be released after ministers have seen it.
It's hard to predict, but yes, it may get up into the thousands. And the key thing here is that we want the turnaround point to be as quick as possible, as soon as possible. So that could be in around 10 days' time if we are doing what we need to do now.
Ashley Bloomfield says it's possible New Zealand will be put into lockdown again as the peaks in the number of cases rises and falls. Modelling by Te Pūnaha Matatini shows a lockdown can suppress the virus for up to 400 days, which could buy the country time for a vaccine or treatment to be developed. But its model also shows that without a vaccine, cases of the virus will still peak well beyond hospital capacity as soon as any lockdown ends. Researcher Sean Hendy has told Checkpoint it's important to eliminate any community transmission. Professor Hendy says the better the country gets at contact tracing and testing, the shorter the lockdowns will need to be. 14 dementia residents at a Hawke's Bay rest home have been placed in isolation after one is considered a probable case of COVID-19. The residents and some staff at Gladys Mary Rest Home in Napier will have to wait for the test results tomorrow to see if they've been infected. Anusha Bradley reports.
The probable case was in contact with a person who was tested positive and visited the rest home while symptomatic on 4 consecutive days between March 17th and 20th. That person had a connection to the cruise ship Ruby Princess, which docked in Napier on March 15th. Bupa, which owns the rest home, says the affected resident was a member of a 14-person community who all live in close proximity. All are now in isolation and family members have been contacted. Ko Anusha Bradley-Aho.
The Royal Commission investigating the Christchurch Mosque shootings says this morning's guilty pleas by the accused gunman will not affect its work. At the High Court in Christchurch this morning, Brenton Tarrant admitted 52 counts of murder, 40 of attempted murder and 1 under the Terrorism Suppression Act. The inquiry says its role is not to inquire into the guilt or innocence of any individual in relation to the attack, so today's developments do not directly impact its work. The Royal Commission is due to hand over its report next month, but it says the COVID-19 restrictions are having a significant impact on its work. John Milne, whose 14-year-old son Saeed died at the Al Noor Mosque, says his family are celebrating.
My daughter said it all. Yahoo! I was happy anyway, but now I'm happier. You know I've forgiven him. My wife won't have to go through all the drama that she was trying to get prepared for. She was determined not to cry, just to show him that what he'd done didn't really affect her. But I don't think she would have been that strong.
John Milne says it's a huge relief. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. The International Football Federation, FIFA, is being urged to change the men's football tournament at the rescheduled 2021 Tokyo Olympics to an under-24 competition. The men's Olympic football competition is usually for players aged under 23, with 3 players in each team allowed to be over age. However, Football Federation Australia is leading the charge to lift the age bracket so that all players that helped teams qualify for the Games this year will still be eligible to compete at the postponed Olympics. The Ollie Whites qualified for the 2020 Olympics, and any changes to the age limit would allow the older New Zealand players to play. National Rugby League players have been asked to take a pay cut of up to 87% as the NRL begins to brace for the scenario of a lost season. The Rugby League Players Association Board will meet tonight to discuss their response after being handed the worst case option, with a final decision expected tomorrow. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. Tomorrow on 9 to noon, we bring you the latest on the COVID-19 pandemic. As we all connect more online, what are the cybersecurity considerations? Expert tips on how to keep yourself and the kids fit and active over the next month. And we meet the father-daughter comedy duo, Courtney and Heta Dawson. Join me, Catherine Ryan, keeping you company and up to date on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Fine spells and isolated showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay mainly fine, scattered rain tomorrow afternoon. Waitomo to Wellington and Wairarapa, including Taihape and the remainder of Hawke's Bay. Areas of cloud and isolated showers today, showers becoming widespread tomorrow, some heavy with hail from tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough except the Kaikoura Coast, Nelson and Buller. A period of rain tonight, then scattered showers clearing tomorrow evening. Kaikoura Coast, Canterbury and Otago. Rain spreading north today, gradually clearing from the south tomorrow. However, some heavy falls north of Christchurch until tomorrow evening. For Westland and Fiordland, rain today possibly heavy, becoming fine tomorrow. Southland rain easing to isolated showers tonight. Chatham Islands mainly fine, a few showers later tomorrow. RNZ National. It's coming up to 7.5 minutes past 6.
Welcome back. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Fareed Ahmed, whose wife Husna was shot dead by mass murderer Brenton Tarrant, wants to meet the man who killed his wife to let him know he is loved and forgiven. The 29-year-old admitted 51 charges of murder, 40 of attempted murder and 1 charge under the Terrorism Act. He pleaded guilty in a virtually empty courtroom because of the nationwide lockdown. Journalists and a single representative from the Al Noor and Linwood mosques were among those present. Husna Ahmed was killed by the gunman as she ran back into Al Noor Masjid to find her husband, who was in a wheelchair. I asked Fareed what today's guilty pleas mean for him.
It is good for everyone. So my respect went to him for owning up, his wrongdoings. Definitely, he needed a lot of courage to own up his wrongdoings, and he has done that. So he has taken the a right step towards the right direction. Good on him. It is good for him, good for me, good for everyone else. good for the country.
When you say that you, respect his decision and his courage to own up to his wrongdoing, a lot of people will find it hard to understand you using those words. Can you explain?
People do horrible things, and in each people, there are two sides. One side is the evil side, and another side is the good, righteous side. And it is with me, it is with you, it is with each and every human being. Some people are very strong in their mind and they suppress their evil part. He has done wrong things, but most particularly when I look at the issue of his guilty plea, that part definitely he has thought well. He has realized that he had done the wrong thing, and he is admitting that. That part is a good part, and I must respect that. And I want to encourage him to, continue taking the right path, continue on walking on the path of love and peace. That is good for him and that is good for everyone else.
Do you actually believe that he realises he's done something wrong, or he just really had no choice?
I want to believe that. I always, like to believe in the good part in human, and I always pray, and I have been praying for him, that God give him proper understanding so that he would understand what he had done wrong, and he can use from within himself the process of correction.
Does today change anything for you? Because you have been very clear about the fact that you have already forgiven this man. So what changes from today for you?
To me, I have got more confirmation that we should wish well for one another. We should pray for one another, to become peaceful and to become loving. And today, from his action, it gave me more hope that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and there is goodness in everybody's heart. And, I need to talk more about love and peace, because it does not take long for the change of a heart. And each heart is a potential heart to be loving, to be caring, to be peaceful, and to be able to spread peace and safety for others without killing and without destroying.
He took from you your wife, Husna. Are you at peace with that?
I'm at peace with that because I believe my wife has gained paradise, because she was a peaceful person. She was a peaceful worshipper, like all other worshippers. So, we all are born to die one day. And, it was her time. She, as far as her side, she did not commit anything wrong. So she was a gainer. She gained paradise, according to my faith. So she has not lost anything. Secondly, my job was to be patient, not to be violent, be passionate, compassionate, loving, not to be angry, to be in peace and to take the peaceful path and not to, take any violent path. So I am glad that I have done my duties in the sight of my God, and as a result, I also did not lose anything. So I was at peace. I'm in peace, and I pray that I always want to be in peace.
Should he, though, be punished with a long prison term?
That part is not with me. As far as I know, that I had done my job. This is, within my capacity, within my control, and I, still love him as a human brother, and I still pray for him to be corrected and to be a better person.
Farid, I know you think of your wife every day. Would you like, before you go, to share a thought about your wife?
How can I say? My wife, number one, she was a blessing for me, for my family, and for everyone. And she was like a aromatic, wonderful rose. And a rose only knows to give good aroma. So Husna has been wonderful, a blessing for me and for everyone else. She is with me, she is part of me, and I married her forever. So I believe that we are separated temporarily, but I believe in next life, and in next life we'll be together again.
Tell me, have you had contact with this man at all since he went to jail?
I have not, but I really want to meet him, talk to him, and express my love for him. And I'm also waiting for the opportunity to meet his family in Australia.
Do you think everyone, your friends, will be comfortable with that? Others who have lost family members?
I'm not sure, Lisa, but I believe, I have to do, what I feel right. My aim is to bring reconciliations, to bring the races closer for the sake of greater peace.
And that is Farid Ahmed. 7 days ago, New Zealand had 11 cases of COVID-19. Today, the total is 283. The Ministry of Health confirmed 78 new cases of the virus today. Charlotte Cook has the latest.
It's day one in a 4-week lockdown and the number of cases continued to go up. The Prime Minister and Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, have admitted it will be a while before we see a slowdown in new cases. New Zealand can expect thousands of people with COVID-19 before the country's isolation efforts begin yielding results.
It's hard to predict, but yes, it may get up into the thousands. And the key thing here is that we want the turnaround point to be as quick as possible, as soon as possible. So that could be in around 10 days' time if we are doing what we need to do now.
He says public health officials are now investigating a number of clusters or groups of cases within a community spread across the country. Dr. Bloomfield says the first instances of events or areas where the virus spread quickly were Marist College in Auckland and the Hereford Conference in Queenstown.
There is also a number of people who were at a wedding in Wellington recently, a group of people who were part of a trip to the United States. There is also a group that appear to be associated with contact from someone who was on the Ruby Princess, and that group is in Hawke's Bay.
One of the people who came into contact with a positive case off the Ruby Princess cruise ship is the first suspected case of community transmission in the region. Public health officials say while they were symptomatic, the person travelled to Gladys Mary Care Home in Tamatea, Hohepa, Clive, Harvey Norman, Hastings, Cornucopia, Hastings, Wellada, Havelock North, Samata Bakery and Mission Winery between the 17th and 20th of March. Gladys Mary Care Home has since confirmed 14 dementia residents have been placed in isolation, as one of them is believed to have the virus. Meanwhile, Dr Bloomfield says medicine hoarding is putting supplies at risk, and so Pharmac will be limiting subsidised prescriptions to 1 month's supply from tomorrow. People will be able to collect a maximum of 3 months' supply for oral contraceptives. Dr Bloomfield says there are no significant shortages at the moment, but the move is necessary to ensure no one runs out of their medicine.
We have seen some stockpiling, unfortunately, by people. There is no problem with the supply chain at the moment, but we do not want to get into a position where some people are unable to get the pharmaceuticals they need because others have them stockpiled at home.
Despite the countrywide lockdown, people are still allowed into New Zealand, but only if they follow strict quarantine rules. The Police Commissioner Mike Bush says 8 of 360 people who arrived at Auckland Airport yesterday showed potential COVID-19 symptoms and were taken to hotels to be tested. Others also needed help finding a place to isolate.
160 of those people didn't have plans, so we're triaging that for them and helping them manage that. But they will stay in those hotels until that can be looked after.
Mike Bush says travellers can be picked up by one friend from their bubble. He also says police are looking at visiting all other new arrivals within 3 days to check they are complying with level 4 restrictions. In Wellington for Checkpoint, on day 1 of the lockdown, Charlotte Cook.
New Zealanders around the world are stuck in travel limbo as they rush to get home amid even tighter restrictions on movement. The government has said there may be no way home for some of these people, although it hasn't ruled out Mercy flights. Mackenzie Smith reports.
Katie Gumbrell lives in the south of England and was due to fly out of London yesterday bound for Auckland. Then her flight was cancelled. The next day, another booked flight, another cancellation. She says it's been a lot of work for no return.
It's not worth it, I think, and to go through all that again, I don't know. I just think it's wiser just to stay put at this stage until flights are up and running again. Kind of like lost hope.
Katie Gumbrell says the only flights on offer now are business class, costing more than £2,000. Another Kiwi, Michael Harrison, lives with his wife in London, but their visas run out next month. They were planning a world tour. Instead, they're just trying to get home to New Zealand.
We have made the decision to cancel all of our travel plans, and we are just going to try and come home as soon as possible. We did book flights to try and do that, and then those flights got cancelled, so we were unable.
Michael Harrison says even if they are unable to leave, the UK government will likely extend their visas because of the disruptions. In Uruguay, 2 New Zealanders working as Antarctic guides are also struggling to find their way home. The pair are on their way back from an Antarctic cruise and are now in Montevideo, where their flights out are being delayed. Polar guide Mal Haskins says they've been in touch with the New Zealand Embassy in Argentina, but there isn't much they can do.
Basically, as of I think the last 12 to 24 hours, the information from the New Zealand government is that there is very little that they can do in regards to extra repatriation flights when and if they happen, because effectively the world airlines are shutting down.
New Zealander Renee DeVos is stuck with her 2 daughters in Mexico after making a day trip there from San Diego, where they were staying. She says when the US closed its border to Mexico, they were stuck with nothing but the clothes on their back. Foreign Minister Winston Peters on Tuesday warned New Zealanders still overseas to stay where they were because of travel difficulties. For Checkpoint, Mackenzie Smith.
It is 23 past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Checkpoints in the far north running testing stations and turning tourists away with no self-isolation plans have been scaled back, with organisers saying they've achieved their desired effect. Organiser and former MP Hone Harawira has been overwhelmed with the support from police, who he says offered their assistance on the condition that volunteers move to a safer spot on the road. Tianiwa Hurehanganui reports.
All vehicles driving north on State Highway 1 near Whakapara or State Highway 12 at Waipoua were stopped and asked 3 questions. Have you just arrived from overseas? Have you been in contact with anyone with the virus? And have you had a fever, sore throat or felt sick lately? Craig and Kylie Kelly, a couple who were travelling towards Kirikiri to isolate with family, arrived at the checkpoint last night.
We've been in and out of van parks and, contacted with other people, so might as well just get checked and we've got no dramas. As long as we're in Kirikiri by midnight.
It's good. Everyone's explaining what's going on, so it's all good.
They told us what was happening and that's the way it is.
Checkpoint organiser Hone Harawira says he has been pleasantly surprised with the support from police.
To have the support of the police like this is just, we were parked up in somewhere which wasn't that clever, and then Rick Few said, if I can find you a better place and I'll give you my boys, will you move? He told us to come down here. It's been great, because he was able to get the cones up, get his boys up that end.
He says thanks to the boys, he hasn't received any trouble from drivers.
If I try to wave people off to the side of the road, they'll run me down. But they won't run a policeman down, so it's just been a positive experience, and of all of the people stopped so far, I think we've turned around 2, maybe 3.
Checkpoint volunteer and Auckland medical student Rose Harris has been screening drivers as they pass through. She says tourists who are asked to turn around are given information and advice.
They've had very clear plans, very clear understanding of what they need to do from now on in regards to our rules and regulations that the Prime Minister has set down. Coming from a space of tautoko, manaki, how can we help them with their plans while they're in our vicinity?
Hone Harawira says the checkpoint was closed this afternoon because the lockdown has had the desired effect of clearing roads of tourists. But he says their focus continues on other checkpoints where they are identifying tourists still in the area and directing them out of the region. They are also supporting an initiative to provide ongoing medical support to kaumātua and kuia across the region. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko te aniwa, hurihanga nui, aho.
Imagine heading into the bush last week and coming out 5 days later, only to find that COVID-19 had turned the world upside down. Well, that's been the mind-boggling reality for Pauline Dupont and her partner, both from Belgium, who emerged from a tramp on Monday to find most international borders shut and virtually no way to get home. The pair are now stuck in Christchurch and are essentially begging on Facebook for help. They spoke to our reporter, Logan Church.
Pauline Dupont and her partner Romaine arrived in New Zealand on the 6th of March for what was supposed to be a month-long holiday. The pair live in Australia on working holiday visas. They were making their way down New Zealand and decided to go on a 5-day bushwalk in the middle of last week.
We met some friends from Belgium and we left for a hike of 5 days and then an extra night in a camp before on the way to the hike. And so we have been without any mobile phone connection for a while. And on our way back to Queenstown, we turned on our phone and realized that we were stuck here.
When they went into the bush, there were 20 confirmed cases in New Zealand. But when they came out 5 days later, there were more than 100, and the country was preparing to go into lockdown along with much of the rest of the world.
We could not breathe for a while, and our brain starts to change into a war mode, like you don't have time, you just have to go quickly to the airport, you just have to act quickly and find the best solution, and we have been very shocked and sad at the same time. And we didn't want to believe, to think that it was really real.
They wanted to get to Melbourne, where they'd been staying and left all of their belongings, or if not, then back to family in Belgium. But Australia had closed its border to non-citizens and residents, so they drove to Christchurch in the hopes they could at least get to friends in Auckland. But there weren't any flights for them there either, so they've been forced to hunker down in Christchurch.
First we thought, okay, we're going to go to the airport and find a solution. And then they told us no, that this was not possible. And then we're just like, we didn't know what to do. We're just like really lost.
But these tourists have a problem. All of their stuff is in Melbourne. They only have a small backpack each.
I have a soap, I have one short, my pen is on me, I have 2 T-shirts, 1 pullover, and the rest is on me. I mean, my jacket is on me, my shoes are on me, I have 4 pairs of socks, 4 underwears, and a reader, which is good.
They put a plea out on Facebook for at least somewhere to stay, and someone has offered to put them up.
We don't want to get trapped. We don't want to be in the streets with just our backpack. It's not safe. We could get sick on the way, and I mean, we don't want to put ourselves in danger, and we don't want to put anyone else in danger. So we thought the safest option was to stay in Christchurch, where we are now.
They're now hoping they might be able to get on a mercy flight the German government is organising for its citizens. But until then, they, along with many other tourists, are here for the lockdown, along with everyone else. For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Some delightful feedback before we head off. This person says they're treating the 4-week lockdown as a cruise ship because they're a cruise ship traveller. Onshore excursions are trips to the grocery store. My onboard activities include movie nights, party nights, arts and crafts. On a fine day, I'll use the pool and do a garden tour. That's weeding and replanting. 1 p.m, daily update from RNZ or similar will be the captain's announcement for the day. And dinner will be each night at the dining table, just as if I was in the dining room at sea. 4 weeks will go fast.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Ministry of Health says it's prioritising who needs to wear personal protective gear after the nurses' organisation called for it for all their members, saying they don't feel safe at work. The Finance Minister says unemployment due to COVID-19 will be much worse than during the global financial crisis. 14 dementia residents at a Hawke's Bay rest home have been placed in isolation due to a probable case of COVID-19. Families of victims of last year's Mosque terror attack say they're celebrating after the gunman pleaded guilty to all charges, and the police have found a hunter who's been missing on Stewart Island, Rakiura, for 3 nights. Those are the headlines. Our next news at 7.
Tonight on Nights, Emmeline Part-Dahlstrom, co-founder of Space Base, debuts as our latest after-dinner scientist, offering a Kiwi perspective on space travel. Our overseas correspondent, Rana Collins, is on the line from Northern Ireland. And this week's cultural ambassador, the podcast